I'm back, folks. If those of you who don't know, I'm just joining the podcast for the first time. I went on a trip to Korea. And for those of you who don't know my face, I am a Korean adoptee and I had never been back to Korea. So this was quite the trip and it all unfolded. There are some previous episodes that you'll hear about the pre trip stuff. And Josh wanted to catch me while I was fresh to just kind of share some thoughts about that in the way that we do.
Yeah, I mean, I thought could catch you while you're kind of fresh, at least. You know,
And by kind of fresh, it's like before the jet lag wears off fully, so they'll be
yeah, like
so
like Brian slept till noon today, so that's jet lag.
that's jet lag.
Let's do
Launch
it.
out, launch out onto the loop today as we do a forensic post Korea trip discussion today on Curiosity Continuum. And this is jet lag because I forgot to cue the music, so we'll just edit this in later, and you'll hear it about here, folks. Hey, everybody, this is Brian.
And this is Josh.
Welcome to the podcast for Curiosity Continuum.
Curiosity Continuum is an industry innovating, non-traditional company passionate about growing wisdom in the next generation.
We are the essential bridge between the analog and digital worlds by building collaborative communities that unleash the power of adaptive expertise and innovation needed to thrive in the 21st century.
We combine and mix essential elements needed to empower people to succeed in new ways, not possible outside of a creative, thoughtful, diverse community of fellow curious people.
Follow us on your favorite podcast app to receive notifications of new content. If you like what you hear and want to dive deeper, visit us at curiositycontinuum.com. Thanks for tuning in, and let's start the conversation.
All right. So we had this idea, or I did, and we started it with the episodes before you left, kind of episode when you were leaving, and now you're back. And to other people, it might just seem like, oh, you're back, boom. Like, but it is a few weeks because I did space them out a little bit. So I just really wanted to kind of like delve in a little bit and talk about like your first impressions that you got there, how the experience was, that kind of thing.
I'll start off by saying this. This trip was life changing for me. And if you've listened to me long enough, I don't use like big swelling words. I try to avoid the word amazing because it's been so overused. you know, this really was life changing for me. That's the tag over all of it, right? When I arrived in Incheon Airport, which is about an hour and a half from Seoul, depending on the time of day, right? It's this island kind of off to the west, and got there, and I was actually kind of the weirdo in the bunch because the people arriving on Sunday, some arrived Saturday and a little earlier. I was early in my flight. We had some massive tailwinds. I was an hour and a half early. So I got a chance to kind of see Seoul rush hour a little bit. I literally walked into the room as the guy was saying, "Welcome to the gathering." like
Okay.
a lot of the other Americans from my corridor of the world were late because they had delayed flights through San Francisco, and I actually went through Minneapolis, which was poetic for me just because that's where I grew up. I grew up in central Minnesota. That's where I met Josh, and that's where a lot of Korean adoptees landed, especially during the 80s and 70s and stuff. Hearing the opening comments and then having dinner with folks, here was what was an eye-opening thing. When you are kind of the only person of your configuration, let's put it that way, right? Like just like a small town in Minnesota, like there wasn't a lot
Right.
of like people look like me walking around. And I get into a room with people from, Michigan, from Virginia, from Minnesota, from California, from Germany, from France, from Luxembourg, right? From Australia, and they're Korean. All of a sudden it's like, oh, wait a minute. I am not alone in my journey of this who I
Right.
am.
Right.
That's the first time I ever felt that in my life. So it's like Winnie the Pooh and Tigger goes and looks for his family. It's like,
Right. Right.
kind of like that. That was something that it was like, wait a minute, I am not by myself. The way I grew up, I was an only child and I was the youngest I'm sorry, my parents were the youngest siblings in their sibling group. So I was in this weird spot. So there's a lot of solitude and solitary experiences I had growing up just because of where I grew up, all that kind of stuff. Now to see people spread out over the world, literally all over the world, talking and sharing, it's like, oh my gosh, what a revelation. More than just meeting people like, hey, yeah, you're Korean too, or whatever. Life changing. Because when you start to hear stories, there's the program that they had, there's the program that happened after the program, which is called going out and having some soju with some folks.
Right.
Now I thought, hey, I'll go out and have a couple of drinks and get to know people, which I did and I appreciated. But I'll tell you what, the European Koreans, and they go hard, man. I tell you what,
Right.
I was
Especially the
like,
French ones, right?
I'm telling you what, man. Um, you know who you are. I won't out you on this podcast, but
Uh,
there's some Scandinavian Koreans out there that they can do it, man. There was also only a 5 hour time difference for them. For me, it was a 15-hour time difference.
yeah.
Whew. A lot of the Americans actually didn't go out as often just because I think we're all tired and shagged out from
Right.
such a weird time difference.
It's a crazy, yeah.
All that to say, I want to just slow down the things I'm saying because you can tell there's just a lot that I'm trying to kind of process in my life. Here's another thing that I realized. As funny as it sounds, I was in the majority for the first time in my life. And there's a level of social thing that just came down. Now, obviously, like, did I speak Korean? I mean, I speak 8 words very poorly still at this point.
Right.
So one of the goals that I have is to learn the Korean language. And a lot of older adoptees actually had the same desire. If you can talk to somebody, you can communicate and you can learn things. So, as we've done on this podcast often, we want to try to make ways people can have a conversation. And a fundamental way that you can connect with a culture or somebody different is that you have some shared language, whether it's the actual language or
Right.
a hobby. That builds the relational infrastructure that's important to connect with folks. What I will say is this: as people began to share their stories, you realized that there's a continuum of where everybody's at in their journey with discovering who they are, who their birth parents are, and you're like, wow, you start to see the overlap. There's people who had really hard growing ups, and there are those who didn't. There are those who have been exploring Korean culture and their identity in that regard for a long time prior, but had never been back. And some had completely, like, said, I don't want anything to do with it, all over. But it was a community. And so when people talk about family gatherings, now Josh has seen probably like little bits of my family gatherings, and
Right.
we were kind of sparse in the Shun household anyway.
Right. Right.
And so family gatherings were even sparser. But this felt more like the community that I always knew, or like they felt like almost immediate friends because there was no like pretense about what you're talking about, right? You could go and talk to somebody. It's like, say, when were you adopted? Right? There was automatic things that you could just start talking about because you knew you shared the experience. And I'm just going to pause saying that and let Josh kind of jump in a little bit here because otherwise it'll be the
No,
Brian monologue.
this is what I wanted, though. I wanted Brian to kind of download his thoughts and kind of like his first experiences, and he did. So I don't know what I really had thought I planned, but I just was kind of like, okay, what is it like? And well, this is the first time also that Brian and I have really talked since he came back. We did have a short uh, conversation on the phone just to prove that Brian was still alive.
I am still
And
alive.
yeah, he's back. That was the whole thing. He's back and he's alive and let's record. And that was like, what was that, Saturday or
Something like that.
Friday,
Yeah.
something like that.
Yep.
So like 3 or 4 days ago. So I just wanted to, and part of me really wanted to get Brian when he was like super jet lagged and just get him on a recording. But then I'm like, let's let the guy at least kind of sleep, right? So he's doing that. He got that going. And I think you answered some of the initial questions I had. Like, what was it like? How did it feel when you landed? I know you're probably tired. Did you
Hmm.
actually? I just want to ask this question. Did you actually get to sleep on the plane?
I did. This is actually the best I've ever slept on a plane.
Sure.
Now, the bar is very low for the quality of sleep on a
Right.
plane,
Right.
but I did. And I tried to, so I would not be just completely out of whack when I got to the
Right.
place, right? I was tired, obviously. I'll just say thank God for good chiropractors when you come back to where you know you can get adjusted, because like my head was off a little bit because it was like leaning back and stuff and whatever. Um, I did sleep. Part of me also fought through I just me wanting to kind of go into myself, right? To go
Right.
be out with people. It may have taken a physical act of like I have to will myself to get there because I'm so tired. But
Right.
when I started engaging with people, that all
Then it
started to
just like
evaporate.
disappears. Like that happens to me too. Like if I travel and I go like a long distance, or even if I just travel, if I am, I kind of become the introverted person. But if I like force myself to do something, then all of a sudden it's like, oh, I'm glad I did this. And so I was going to ask that, like, were you glad that you like went out with people that were other
Always,
adoptees? And
always.
so, what was that experience like? Like, obviously they were all from all over the world. So how was that like? Was it like just odd, or was it like, oh, we're just kind of like, oh, we're just hanging out?
One of the most natural feeling groups of people, even though you'd never met, even though that English may not be the primary fluent language of the person,
Right.
you just were, and you were very comfortable. And that was the thing that was so striking. I am not one to just automatically assume that we will be friends or we will get along,
Right.
right? I'll test the waters. You know, I want to see kind of how you are. And I think most people who want to have deep relationships, especially, well, I'll just say if you're an introvert more, you're kind of gauging that more before you just start dumping everything out, because not everybody wants to hear everything you have to say, and you just have to gauge that. This group, it was, you just kind of fell in. It was a
Sure.
very natural feeling. And I think that was shocking for a lot of us to go, man, this is just like, this is easy.
So probably because not only have you had the similar experience being adopted, but because you were all there for the same reason,
Yes,
which was to like rediscover stuff or at least experience something.
a
And
lot.
so when you're all there and you're all open to it, and there's no one there going like, middle finger and like F you and all that kind of stuff. It's like,
Right?
you're not like, you're not on the side of the road somewhere down here. Like, oh, I need this help. This
Right.
is actually people that were there to help and like actually wanted to talk. That just opens everybody up to that.
It was a way where we all just like, oh, our system could take a breath.
Right.
And sometimes it was the breath that you didn't know you needed until you took it. Uh, Here's a funny thing. So Josh knows, if you look at Josh and myself together standing side by side, like we are very differently sized people, right?
Yeah.
And and Josh can very easily point to, yeah, Brian was always like the smallest guy generally in the school almost. And
Yeah.
you
If you
know,
like look at a picture of the whole school and you just look for like where you can't see anybody, and then you kind of go in and it's usually Brian in there somewhere.
I was above average height. There were still
Right.
people taller than me.
Of course.
I'm telling you what, folks, if you've never been above average height in a group of people, it is it it messes with you in a great way. I'm like, oh my gosh, you know. I just learned a lot by observing, because what it did is it allowed me just to be in a group and not have to explain why I'm different, or people looking at you because you're different. Now coming back to where I live now, I went to the grocery store and I can tell you I can count on, I need two hands to count the number of looks I got while I was in the grocery store shopping for Christmas groceries. On the Korean subway, people don't talk on the Korean subway, by the way. The only people that spoke on the Korean subway while I was there were the loud Americans,
Yeah.
right?
I've heard that about like Japan, especially Tokyo, but like they don't talk on the subway. In fact, they like it to be quiet.
It was actually very nice. Now, a lot of people on their phones. Like we think in the US people are on their phones. The Koreans love themselves some phone time,
Sure.
especially in the subway. Now, I also learned part of the reason why is because of culturally, they're very attuned to somebody's age, right?
Right.
And they'll even ask the question. They're not asking you like, "Are you old, old man?" It's not that. They want to know how to address you, so they give proper respect. Part of the reason why people aren't talking or trying to catch eye contact, like in America, you look up, you look somebody in the eyes, you talk to them. If you caught eyes with an elder and you held the gaze, it's actually disrespectful. So many people are just like trying to avoid the eye contact, and they're not being rude. They're trying to be respectful, which all of a sudden the light dinged at me when I was like, like rubbernecking in the subway looking at people. And there was this older lady that looked at me, and I smiled at her, and she kind of gave me like a scowl. And I was being friendly, but she probably thought like this young man is being disrespectful to me. And whoever you are, I'm sorry, that's not what I intended to
Right.
do. But what that did is like everybody just kind of moved along. There was no trash cans really to speak of.
Right.
Very rarely, and everybody's carried the trash with them. Right. This is the U.S. Be like, oh, here's my bag of
Yeah,
trash.
it's
Just
on the
throw it.
floor. Say hello to the ground.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would feel fine sitting cross-legged on the floor of the subway. It was that clean.
Yeah.
Like they care about their space, right? Um,
It's like a social contract of this communal space.
correct.
Yeah.
I think what's important when you come into a space like that is to understand those things. So part of the second thing that a lot of adoptees wanted to know were culture and history things, right? What do I do if I'm coming into this space? How do I interact? Now, what's nice is that because the world is so connected now, people understand if you're not culturally Korean, right? They don't necessarily expect you to be culturally Korean. Like, would they expect Josh to all of a sudden just know everything? No. So they understand that those are those give and
Yeah.
take.
Fat white guy. Yeah. I'm not culturally Korean at all.
For me, because I didn't know the
And
language.
you looked Korean,
Yep.
which you
That
are.
took a little bit, but
Yeah.
when they heard it, it's like they quickly adjusted,
Sure.
right? And I'm gracious for them adjusting. Now, what I also learned is that some people sometimes may be reticent to talk because if they didn't have English like competency as much as they thought they needed to, like it would be almost a shame to them or their
Correct.
family or their
Correct.
company
Correct.
to
Yep.
like not show that they were good at it. And honestly, I can understand that, especially if the culturally it's like, well, you're not representing yourself well because you don't have command of it, right? For me, for growing up in America, it's like like if you're trying, like that's actually the gold star, right? Screw it up, that's okay. Like let's work
That's how you
together on
learn.
it,
Yeah.
right? And that's kind of like a different thing. Is like there didn't have to be a specific competency for it, and I appreciated that. Now, people who have been to Korea previously in the last like 20-25 years especially, there's been more things where there's more English translation of things. The business world runs on English a lot when you talk about international things, and so those kind of things give people. But there's more internationals now ever than ever coming to Korea, so there's more and more of a presence, and so it's become more, I guess, accommodative and friendly, so that you can navigate without having to learn Hangul or learn every little thing. Like there's kind of a different fabric, and which is nice.
Yeah. So I think you touched on a couple of things I was going to ask you. And I just wanted to know, like, after and this episode probably ran a little longer than most of our others, but that's okay. How did, like, after a while, did you start feeling a little comfortable? Like, was it during, like, were you like comfortable in the way that, like, oh, I can get around, and that kind of stuff? But were you like, oh, I could definitely come back here?
100%. I want this to be the first trip of many trips. And I wouldn't have said that even 3 months ago.
Right.
It's what for the timeline for folks who are tuning in. This all happened in less than 3 months, where I found out about the organization, where I found out about what they even did to get the application, to get the approval, to get the flight book to go over.
It
Right.
was quick.
By the way, folks, the other gem here is that I got to meet my foster mom, which I'll share more details in a moment. And maybe we may carve it out, Josh. But
Yeah, I think
there
we
was
would maybe
so
do that, and like we can carve that out in an entire new episode. That might
so
be
tune in.
that might
We'll
be really
flag that
good.
one, folks, for you.
Yeah.
I'll tell you a little bit more detail about that. There was such a feeling of I belonged in a way that I've never experienced before. That it made me, like I said, my system kind of took a breath, and it's a wonderful feeling. If you've never experienced that, you sometimes you don't know until you have to do it, and then you go, "Oh, this is what this is like." I would feel comfortable. Seoul is also a very safe city. It
Sure.
has a reputation for that. Now, I have a beautiful 15-year-old daughter, right? And I would feel comfortable with her taking the public transportation anywhere around the city, which is very different than if you went to DC or New
Or
York
New
or,
York or LA or
yeah,
whatever. Yeah.
different set of considerations and different way people roll. In Korea, I felt very safe. So, like, I had to study the subway system. Now, if the subway system in Seoul is robust and wonderful. And I wish that all cities had a public transit system like Seoul. And I still had to learn like how the lines ran,
Right.
right? By the let's see here, I was there 9 days, and I didn't have to take much public transit while I was in the conference. But in the days following, I spent about 4 days doing my own thing, 4.5 days. I got really comfortable with it. I take this line to this stop, and what I liked about it is that I could kind of pull myself off to the side. We got told like which apps were useful before the conference, which was very handy because Google Maps is not the gold standard there. It's Naver is the name of the company, and they are like a big conglomerate of companies. So they had Naver Maps. Uber works, just so you know, folks. It turns into Uber Travel, and it's a different icon, and you can hail a cab in Uber in Korea, which is very handy. Um, I could just look, and nobody bothered me. And if I had asked a question, I'm sure people would have helped me get to where I needed to go. But I was like, okay, this is it. I go and I quietly stand, and it just worked. Right. It took me a little bit longer sometimes to decode, but I eventually got there. But I didn't feel the need to have to figure it out right now, or like somebody's going to take advantage of me or see weakness. So I guess
Right.
that's something you talk about in public places. If you look like a tourist in some cities, like like hey, we're gonna like take advantage of you. We're gonna figure out how to charge you more money, or we're gonna charge and
Yeah.
every city's got those stories regardless where you are. This one, it was like they just there's another person looking at their phone trying to figure something. They don't know what I'm doing, and they never asked, and I never volunteered the information because it just was. Um, as mundane as that may sound to people, it really was meaningful. I didn't have to stand out because I stood out naturally. I just could just be. And that's a very calming experience.
Yeah. I think that's maybe a good spot to kind of leave it. Like, this was a calming experience overall. It was also an eye opening experience. And I think in an episode or two, like, we are going to kind of go through some of this stuff.
Thanks, folks, for listening to the first initial thoughts. More episodes coming soon around this topic. Until next time, this is Brian
And this is Josh.
for Curiosity Continuum.